Okay. So the agenda here really is to explore the value of visualizing solution-focused change processes. And so by introducing one that I use with people in various settings, really what I'm hoping to do is encourage you to consider, how would you visualize the work you do? How do other people visualize or diagram solution-focused practice, or is that a new concept, a new idea to you? How many of you have seen some kind of diagram or visualization of a solution-focused process? Have you seen something like what? Give us an example of one you've seen.
Could you put the light on? Thank you, Danny. Watching
We're
this.
hearing some background sound.
Sorry, I've just realized I was on mute.
Okay, thanks. And if you're not too shy, if you could have your video on, I do like to see everybody if we can. Um, have you seen another example of someone who visualized or diagrammed solution-focused practice, and what are you familiar with there? Okay, someone mentioned that the diamond method. Anyone else? No, but as opposed to just bullet lists, or if you were describing it verbally. How many were familiar with, there's a game that someone in Europe, I'm trying to remember her name, Gesa Doringer, has a game in which you work your way around with solution-focused things. And so by doing that, you're visualizing a process, or at least leading someone through it. Any others that you've seen? Have any of you ever attempted or needed to introduce the solution-focused process that you're using in order to explain it to someone, and tried to visualize or diagram it? Draw a picture, as it were. No. Okay. Not a bunch of artists in the crowd. Well, the reason I think it's important, and I'll just briefly introduce it, is that we're living in more and more of a visual world, right? If you get information on something, you're often going to want to see a picture of it. You're going to get a video of it. You're going to get a TikTok or an Instagram or something. And I personally am a visual learner. So all through my education as a young person, going back to grad school twice as an adult, and then every field I get into, I end up diagramming or visualizing what is going on, because it's the way I think. And whenever I do presentations, I will always have visuals or diagrams. And that's just the way I think. And I also found that I've worked primarily, so I'm in Longmont, Colorado, and I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, done solution-focused coaching for people in career change. And then the main work that I did for a number of years was working with chronic pain patients, both in private practice and then in a hospital setting for a couple of years. And I developed a solution-focused approach to that. And what I found was my job was self-managing chronic pain. I have lived with chronic pain for 35 years, so this is part of my life. And I had to learn how to do that. And I was astounded when I first studied solution-focused practice with Terry Pichot here in the US, that I was already doing about 50% of those things just intuitively. But when I started reading up on how to introduce it to people, I began running into clients in the clinic who wouldn't work with me unless I could explain what I was doing, because I wasn't manipulating their bodies. I wasn't cutting anything. I wasn't injecting anything. There was no treatment. It was self-managing your pain through changes in your daily life. So I found myself drawing on a whiteboard over and over and over a diagram of how I would work in a solution-focused manner. And so what I want to do is sort of show you the diagram that evolved from that work with chronic pain patients, and then how I've expanded it and used it with some other kinds of people in other circumstances. And in a way, just to keep it personal, I want to tell you how I use it. So it came out of my need to make sense of this morass of things. How many of you seen the books? I forget the author now. I have several of her books. She's also from Europe. 101 solution focused questions, 1,000 solution. There's an infinite number of those questions that we can ask and an infinite number of ways we can engage in the conversations. But what I found is in keeping with a brief therapy practice, the average number of times I met with a patient in the hospital for chronic pain was one. Sometimes I felt like that meant I failed, they didn't get it, and they didn't come back because I did a bad job. But what I wanted to do was make sure they left with an idea like, you don't have to come back, but you can continue this work on your own. How do I get that across in one session? And how do I get them to understand, for example, when chronic pain is so big, it's like a mountain in your way and you can't get over it. How do you understand the value of one small step, right? That small step is often so small that they wouldn't take it because they needed a giant change. So I would be like, how do I get a lot of this across? And what if they don't ever come back? So what I'd like to do, I do want to ask quickly if you could tell me, just so I know what I'm dealing with, tell me what kind of work you do with whom. Just one sentence. If you all could just unmute yourselves and tell me who's here doing what kind of work. Yeah.
Jonathan Sherman. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I work with couples and individuals and families, helping them create greatness in their relationships.
Oh, nice tagline. Okay. Others.
Psychotherapy. Everyone who is willing to come.
Okay.
I'm Gracie Landis. I work with mostly couples in private practice in New York City.
Okay, good.
My name is Thea. I work with mentally ill people in Boston.
Okay.
Adults.
Therapists? Non-therapists?
Social workers?
Okay.
School-based and private practice.
School. Okay, good. They work in organizations?
I work in organizations. I'm a public speaker mostly, a facilitator. I try to teach strengths-based ideas, and solution focus is one of them, to organizations.
Okay, thanks.
I missed the education. Sorry.
Oops.
Sorry, go ahead.
Suzanne.
Sorry. I work at a university, so I'm a therapist at the university in England.
Good.
My apologies for the screen being off, and my daughter's next door being loud, and I'm trying to eat. So I was.
Oh, feel free. Go ahead.
So.
Anyone else? Okay. So how many of you find that you, at some point, you explain solution-focused practice to someone, teach them about it, as opposed to just doing it? I mean, you can just drop in and do it. But how many times do you find yourself trying to explain it to someone?
I'm a fan. I like to explain it to people because a lot of my clients, it is just like for many of us as practitioners, it was a really life-altering moment when we realized, oh wow, that's how the model works. And so I'm always a fan of kind of showing people what's under the hood, showing them the engine, and letting them know that, hey, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And once they hear that, they're like, wow, they really like that idea. And then now we're really collaborating together as two people trained in the model.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like to pop things on people. I like them to know where we're going. Because when I go to therapy or see a consultant for something, I kind of want to know, what are you going to do? So let me do this. I'd like to share my screen here. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop the document that I'm going to look at into the chat. so you can all download it and have a copy if you want for when we're not sharing. Let's see. And then I'm going to share my screen. All right. So that's the document. I've just put it into the chat. You can download that if you want. I'm going to share my screen and we'll open it up here. Now, everybody see that? Let's see if I can see everybody's lovely faces as well. So here we are. This is what I call the spiral model of solution-focused change. I kind of want this to be pretty interactive. So if you want to pop in and interrupt me or something. I guess what I'd like to do just to introduce this is to say, take a look at it and tell me, what do you notice? What just pops out of it, or what do you notice just without me explaining anything at this point?
I think you're describing iterations.
Okay. You're right. Iterations. What else? What else?
I like how, yeah, for me, of course, I'm so used to using the scaling question and drawing it out that way. But I really like the extra component of the spiral in there because it adds a level of dynamism to it, or dynamic energy to it, to help maybe people realize that there's a lot, like with most change, it's not a linear going up the scale type of thing. There's a lot of movement and some other elements around that. And I'm curious I'm gleaning some of what you're meaning by experiences, realizations, and experiments, but it'll be interesting to see what you have to say about that. But it kind of adds maybe a more robust nature to it. It's interesting.
Yeah. This thing doesn't stand alone. I usually build this, and I usually do it on a whiteboard, and I may not build all of it, but this is sort of the comprehensive thing. What I do think is important, and this maybe it's the solution-focused approach in general, or it could be my take on it, is that I always keep the preferred future at the center of our work. And my experience with chronic pain clients especially was, if they could not articulate a preferred future, they would just not budge. So I was trying to figure out, how do I show that this is the center? And so I literally made it the center, and everything in here points at that. So you can't look at this and forget about the preferred future. Let's step through it piece by piece, and then we'll return to the whole thing. People differ on this, but I always start with the problem. My background is primarily adult education. And in adult education, they often say no adult learns anything unless they're trying to solve a problem. And so people arrive with a problem. I say, fine, let's start there. And the way I describe it is, the problem is what you don't want. Briefly. Now, I'm not going to go into all the kinds of questions that I could do to explore that, but I do want to explore that. And I want to know, what is the problem that brought you here? And I know that the brief training group in the UK tends to steer away now from the problem. I'm sort of more old school. I love starting with the problem. I believe it's important. However, I want to move quickly from what you don't want to what you want instead, which is what we call the preferred future. And it became quite evident to me as we talk about that, that became the destination. I originally started doing solution-focused work as a coach with people in career change and business and professional challenges. And so they were used to the idea of a goal or a destination. And my sense was, if you don't want to, if you want to move away from the problem, you could just jump in a taxi and say, get me away from here, right? But when you get in a vehicle to go somewhere, you're usually like, there's a destination. So this is very important to me, is to say, let's explore the preferred future and try to describe it. So what you want instead. All right, so next step is to scale something. And the easiest thing is scale the problem they brought in, the preferred future they've described, however briefly. You're now aware there's a gap between them. Everybody arrives with a gap. This is what I want. This is where I'm at. And so the next thing is simply to say, where are you today? None of this is rocket science for solution-focused practitioners. But remember that I'm doing this with a person on the whiteboard while they're talking through it. So they're now beginning to see, they're beginning to hold these two things. They're beginning to be aware that there's a gap between them. And now they have to think, okay, where am I today? And they'll pick a number, and generally with chronic pain, it was a 1 or a 2. And then I would explore, why are you a 1 or a 2, not a 0? Why are you a 3, not a 2, a 1? And then I explain, these are exceptions. This is when the problem that brought you here is not happening, okay? So, and there's a little part of me that's forgotten how others teach this, because I've been doing this way. And whether that's obvious that exceptions mean exceptions to the problem. And I'm quite comfortable with the idea. And I will say that with that exploring or keeping the problem in mind was a way to work very effectively with chronic pain patients, because they are so aware of the problem. If you try to jump to some imaginary future, they're not going to go there. But what they did not know, and it was sort of up to me to draw their attention to it, was how many times a day, a night, a week, did they not have any pain at all? And I will always go for the extreme, because that's what they want. Their preferred future is, I want no pain. So I'd say, how often do you not have any pain? And most of the time, I could stop here and send them home for a week and just say, come back next week and list 24 of these moments where you had no pain for 1 minute, 2 minutes, an hour, an afternoon. And they were shocked. I met people who believed they were in pain 24/7. And I know emotionally people feel like, I'm always anxious, I'm always depressed. So that discovery of an exception to the problem, you could do almost without a preferred future in mind. So none of this is totally formulaic. But as we know, if you keep going, you take an exception and you flip it. The flip side of an exception is when the problem doesn't happen. But what I call a realization is when the future does happen. The reason I like the word realization is the future is being made real in little moments today already. So it's not really the future, it's present. I think the brief organization refers to these as instances in which the future occurs. If you want to look at them, they're literally the same thing, but it's a flip. The exception is a bad thing is not happening. What is happening is a good thing, and that's your preferred future. And the opposite of, think about this, the most common response I got to what's the problem is, I'm in pain. What do you want? If a miracle happened, no pain. And then it's like, and no pain means what? There's this big blank. I'm happy, I'm energetic, I'm calm, I'm relaxed, I'm doing fun things. All those realizations are positive statements. And those two are happening now, however small. So I say, we're going to look at that and we'll flip to this. Now, this is where the iteration begins, because in general, they're going to have to do this, try this, and then try again. So I say, once you've got exceptions and realizations, you've now got at least 2 different ways to view things you're already doing that are working. Do more, right? That's the, if what you're doing is working, do more. But you have 2 ways to describe it. The future happening and the problem not. And then the next thing is to say, what's one small step? What would be one small sign that things were moving in the right direction? Now, what I like about this now is, someone mentioned, yes, it's iterative, and that's what you're going to get at, is that you're visualizing movement, and every movement toward the preferred future is away from the problem. And I think that that's a helpful thing for people to visualize is, where am I going? And look where I can move up. And that small step can be, a half a step. It can be 2 steps. So they've got the idea now. Look at how many components we've looked at. Problem is 1. Preferred future is 2. A scale is 3. Exceptions is 4. Realizations is 5. These are components that I see as basic parts of it. Now, this may be all a person needs, and they'll keep moving. But if they get stuck, if they run out of, I would run into people who say, I had one moment in the last week where I wasn't in pain. So you go back to the past. The next thing, I'm trying to click here. The next thing is, what's another iteration? I call this experiences because I like its resonance with exceptions. You have exceptions, and the experience here I'm talking about is your past. When in the past have you encountered this exact same problem or one like it? And what did you do then? When, what strategies did you use to overcome that problem or to move toward this preferred future? So notice on this diagram, the preferred future, when you have the word realizations, it's pointing at the preferred future to remind you that's what you're realizing. Here, experiences is really pointing at it too. I want past experiences in which you move toward the same future you want now. And what did you do? Okay, so you adapt something that worked in the past. And then you take small steps based on that. So you now have got more tools in your arsenal of solutions. And meanwhile, here's where the loop comes in. You don't forget about realizations. You keep an eye on them. So you're now passing through. Now you've got experiences, exceptions, and realizations, and you keep doing what's working as well as doing again what used to work. And then as you keep moving on, there's going to be a point when what you're doing isn't working, so you do something different. And I call those experiments. Again, these are easy words to remember for a person. Exceptions, experiences from the past, and experiments are things you haven't done. I just had a client come this week who had never been in therapy before. And we were looking at this and we said, you're doing an experiment right now, coming to see me. That was a small step. So from that, you pick up new options and ways of dealing with moving from the problem toward your preferred future. And here's where the word iteration comes in. It's an iterative process, and you keep doing that. And what I always emphasize to people is the speed and the number of those steps is not set. Those small steps could all take place within 3 days, and you could move from here from 3 to 7 on the scale. Or it could take 3 months, or it could take 3 years. The point is, if you're moving, you're not stuck. And that's why I use this spiral model, because there's a sense that we're going to cycle through the same processes. It could become, tedious, or it could become quite fascinating how many tiny little steps get us there. And that's the model. Now, what I want to do is run through it quick and show you what there are 3 pieces. So these are resources and strategies that a person has, and they've come with all of these, and you find them all from within them. And this was always surprising to people with chronic pain, that I wasn't offering any advice or therapy. I was helping them find these, and most of them found them in the past experiences. The present solutions are those exceptions when the problem doesn't happen or when the future does. And it often helps to flip the coin and look at it both ways. Those are all happening now. And the most stunning thing is if I would sit down with a person and we would go through, I would just have them list these. I'd write them on the board. I had a woman once come up with 17 things that she was doing already. 17, and she had arrived feeling stuck with no options at all. So it's amazing. And some people will only come up with one. But then the future, again, is an experiment, a thing I've never done. I'm going to try it. Now, none of this is rocket science if you know solution-focused therapy. But for me, what it did was it gave me a way to put this model in front of somebody. If you looked at how long we just spent talking, 15 minutes or so, that's what I would do. I would just draw this on the board, piece by piece, add it all up, and then I would say, let's try it. Let's go through an example. Before I do that, though, I kind of want to just pause and say, what do you think? What's your impression? Thoughts?
As I was saying initially, just looking at it without knowing, and then hearing you talk about it further, it just feels more dynamic. It feels, we always look at what are the small steps, what are the exceptions to the problem. But I think, like you said, visually, it really helps people see it. I think adding in that, it adds a tangible layer rather than just talking about things conceptually or just thinking about things. It really, I think, it just lays it out, splays it out, gives a lot more. It just feels like we're really exploding the solution further, just exploiting it more,
Yeah, thanks.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, I didn't think I was going to like it.
That's fine.
I'm being honest. I saw it and I thought, it's so wordy. It's, ooh, no, I don't like this. And then you started talking and you broke it down, and I'm captivated, actually. I've just started working with someone with real chronic pain as well, the first time in ages. So I'm also going, oh, yes, oh. Yeah. But it's brilliant. I work with a lot of visual thinkers, so I'm looking at it now in a different way, and I can picture a snail. Forgive me. It's an arts university I work at. But actually it's really, really good. And my initial thing of the image, which was, ooh, so much words, has completely gone after seeing it. I can picture you at your whiteboard, creating. Thank you. It's wonderful.
Any other comments?
So to me, it explains, because at the beginning you said you have average sessions of one with each of your clients, because they know on their own how to do it themselves. And with this model, I understand how they have the tools to do it to do that themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I often would preface my meeting is that I want to make this meeting worth your while if you never come back. So before we leave, I want to show you a process you can do yourself with no guidance, and we're going to leave with at least one step that you can take when you leave here. And then if you want to come back and you want to walk through, and most people do because it's hard to do this alone. But the idea was, after a while, I began to see a pattern. They're not coming back. And many of them, I think it's because it didn't work for them. But the idea was, how can I empower them with the possibility? But I wouldn't throw this picture up right here. I would say, let me explain it like, Susanna said, and draw it on the board piece by piece. However, there is something, I think, in the value of just staring at it and going, okay, I can, in effect, see all the parts. It might be a thing I'd give to them to take afterward and say, hang it on your fridge. And then literally the way that I think is important to approach the whole process is, these are the steps I sort of condensed out of everything everyone said. At no point does it say, what are the right questions to ask? and you got to adapt those to the person and the context. But it's a way for me to stay on track too, so I don't lose track of something. But you can literally jump into this now once you understand it at any point. You could just say, let's cut to an experiment. Like, okay, what's an experiment you could do? You could go back and say, wait, I'm now beginning to understand the problem differently. I'm actually trying to solve a different problem. So you get more clarity on the problem. And I often saw the thing that would happen the most with chronic pain patients who finally allowed themselves the hope that life could be better. That's what would happen. They'd begin to see life could be better. They began to get richer, preferred futures. I mean, literally in the beginning, a lot of people couldn't tell me anything they wanted except I want the pain to stop. Of course they do. So what I would do is do the miracle question. And I'd imagine you wake up tomorrow and I would just give them what they want. The miracle would be you wake up tomorrow and the pain is gone. You have no pain at all. And it's surprising as hell. I don't understand what the hell just happened. And then I would say, now imagine everything about your life, including your body, is exactly the same. Nothing has changed, but you're no longer in pain. What are you going to do with your pain-freeness? And then it'd be like, just imagine that it doesn't ever come back. And so then at some point I'd back them up and say, of course, if you still feel pain, do you still not want those things? Like a lot of people wanted to go hiking and it'd be like, can you not hike? And I would tell them a story about when I first was in a wheelchair, crippled with chronic pain, and I wanted to hike. I moved to Colorado to hike 14ers. And then I was crippled within 2 years and stuck in a wheelchair. So I would explain that the small step I took was I'm going to go hike again if it kills me. And I'm going to start by wheeling my wheelchair outdoors in a beautiful place next to a parking lot. And so that they began to realize, oh, I can do those things. And then their preferred futures began to fill in more realistically, and they began to drive them. And then they'll go out and try it. They'll do an experiment. And when they do, they find those small steps make a difference. But if I didn't explain this to them, and they came in with cancer, or their legs don't work, or they've got nerve pain in their neck or back, and then I say, we'll just take one small step. We're like, no, it's not going to work for me. So it helped them to see this process and then step through it. But then they have to do it. Any other comments about it? Anything else? Like, for example, if you were going to improve this or change this, like make this one unit better on your own scale, like how good is this model? And you might do that in your mind now. Don't put that in the chat, but imagine you're scaling this model in terms of its usefulness to you. 0 is it's totally useless. And 10 is like, man, this is wonderful. I'm going to just hand this out to every person I see on the streets. Mentally, find a spot on that scale. Where are you at? And then if you were going to improve it or change it in such a way that would make it more useful to you, what's one thing you might do for you? And I might steal your idea. But is there something that you could think would be one small improvement? Yes, Ava.
I work in organizations with executives, leaders, and this model, I love it, because if there was one thing I would change, though,
okay,
just one.
Yep.
So using organizational language. Mm-hmm. So experiments would be pilots. Let's pilot this.
Brilliant.
So, but everything else, in terms of explaining the model, in terms of, walking them through. And I love the way you walk through it, because then I got a lot more clarity. I can see it. And I find it interesting about the problem approach, because in organizational design, we diagnose, we identify gaps, right? So, but you don't stay there. So making the preferred future at the center of it, acknowledging the problem and how can we shift towards, taking those steps. I find it really great for chronic issues.
Yes. Yeah, really think chronic pain is a good metaphor for all kinds of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I also have used this with people suffering from grief. And when a person dies, it's chronic, right? I think it's interesting to think about your context in which you might use this, because I could imagine in a corporate setting, preferred future might be a strategic goal, right? And the gap that I remember showing, they do gap analysis. So even that would tie into their sense of stuff like that. Any other thoughts about what you would do to modify it? Maybe it's for your own setting. Anyone else?
So I arrived at home. Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, I love this because since years I have a picture in my head about life, seeing it as a spiral. And a problem is somewhere inside the spiral. And sometimes on your way, you get into the problem and then you get out of the problem again. And then in the spiral coming up, suddenly you hit the problem again, but you're on another level. And I've always been thinking that is very helpful to think. I didn't start at square one, but I'm in the same problem on a new level. And this reminds me of this picture and gives me new idea how I could put it down on paper.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. To me, the spiral implies that things can improve, they can go up, but they can also go down, right? So we talk about a vicious circle. The vicious circle is where you come back to the same spot over and over and over. But the spiral is, well, something is moving in one way or another. And of course, we all know you can slide back and forth on that scale, day to day, hour to hour. But overall, I found people, especially with chronic pain, when they got to a 7 or 8, they were just fine. And I do want to give you an example really briefly of a woman who came in and I would normally, the way I did this, if I could do it the most effectively, is in a group. A group will learn a lot from each other. And you walk through this with the group and you have their problems on this side and their preferred futures on this side, and you leave them there for them to see. But this woman entered a 5-week group. So it was 5 weeks we did at the hospital, the first pilot study. In fact, if you ever want to look at how I did that with an earlier version of this diagram, it's in the Journal of Solution Focused Practices. I published an article in 2021. But she came in with severe pain, nearly crippled. And when we ranked her on a scale, she was a 1. There was barely anything going well for her. And as we explored her preferred future, she had cervical discs that had been severed. This woman had been raped as a nurse in a hospital by a patient. She was unable to walk. And when we looked at what did she want if she woke up with no pain, she wanted to reconnect with everybody that mattered to her. She had literally been isolated for a year in her home and was pondering suicide when I met her. We can fast forward, but what I'd say is all the steps she came up with were social connection, support, and engagement. And then she started doing some things she liked, like gardening, which was almost impossible to do, but she figured out between her and a social connection how she could get down and get up and garden again. So she made very small changes, reconnected with family and friends. And so what I would say, here's a really amazing, powerful thing, is that the surprising stuff can be incredibly therapeutic. So doing almost exclusively social activities with very limited physical ability. In 5 weeks, we ranked her again. Where are you at? And she was a 9. A 9 on this scale. That's an 800% improvement. And then when I asked her, how is your pain today, given she was, and this scale that we were using primarily was a quality of life scale, and to which we would attach problems and preferred futures. She said, my pain is exactly the same. It hasn't changed. I'm delighted to be living again. I've recovered my life. I have friends again. I've reconnected with my family. And she said, because of this process, I feel like I can handle any problem the world throws at me. So she was now going, how else do I change all the rest of my life? And so it wasn't medical treatment that did it. It was psychological and it was social, which was truly therapeutic for her. And then she became a case study we published for the hospital newsletter. And, it was a wonderful illustration of what can happen. Other people, to be honest, moved from a 1 to a 2, but they still had hope. So the one woman I like to remember is a woman who with a severe psychiatric problems, and I didn't deal with any of that. That wasn't my issue. Severe chronic pain, almost unable to walk because she was so overweight. Her knees had been shot. She'd had multiple surgeries. She lived in a house alone, and she was a hoarder. I didn't care about any of that. She came to this thing. She actually walked in the room with a cane. And the most surprising thing that happened to her was the first week when I sent everyone off to look for exceptions to the problem. It was like, list as many times this week that you can find you're not in pain. It doesn't matter what else has happened. You pause, you notice, I'm not in pain right now. She found one such moment in a week. And she came back and her face was all lit up like you would never imagine. One moment she was free from pain gave her hope. And that's what I think this model can do, is that one moment was all she needed to believe change was possible. And then change began to happen. And so I think that's why having this in front of you is a powerful way to do it. And now I'm wondering, some of you have joined and come and gone since I posted this in the chat. Has everybody gotten a copy of this in the chat and downloaded it? Because if you joined later, I don't think you can see it. So I'm going to upload it again right now before we conclude, so that everybody can download this and keep it. And here's my invitation to you. Use this as you wish, okay? I do have a copyright on it. I like people to say, hey, I got this from Jay E Valusek, but I'm not too worried if you find it helpful. And if you want to modify it, you want to change it. Basically, my feeling was, as a visual learner and a visual teacher, it made a huge difference to me to find a way that was, as previous gentleman said, dynamic and inspiring enough to people that if they got nothing but this from one session and walked through it and understood the steps, I believe they could go off and make significant change alone without support. Let me just say one last thing. We have about 2 minutes. I just want to say, and this isn't to upset you, but I presented a paper at the 2018 Solution Focus Brief Therapy Association conference in Boulder on chronic pain. And when I did that presentation, It was 4 months after my daughter took her own life. And it was the first time I'd been out in public. And I don't know how many of you know Heather Fisk, but I met Heather at that conference. We talked about suicide. She's the first person I told. But the reason I mentioned this is that I realized at that conference, when I was talking about chronic pain, that this model was how I would survive my daughter's suicide. And so the short thing I want to get across is that I kept this in front of me, this process. In fact, I worked on it more to sort of clarify it while I went through my own chronic grief process that took a number of years. It's been almost 6 years now. But that when she first died, one of the first questions that came to me alone one night as a solution-focused practitioner working in a hospital with solution-focused model was, what the hell good is this to me now? What good is this process to me now? Is it, or is it a charade? And the answer I had at first was a little disturbing, is I've got no future. I don't know if you've realized or remember how it is when someone dies. There is no future. It was wiped out. But as soon as I asked myself the question, is this model good? Is this model any use to me as a father who just lost my daughter? And I paused and I thought, yes, because now I want to work with others who have suffered this kind of pain. And all it did was give me a future worth living for. And for me, making sense of her death was the thing that I needed to spend time doing. And I wrote a book about it, in which I included some solution-focused work. And so even in the most horrific circumstance, I have actually turned to this process, and it has kept me moving and not getting stuck. And I think if you apply this work with yourself, you are your best testimony for its value. And I'm going to stop the share and let you go all. I know there's another session coming. If anybody wants to hang around, if you're not going somewhere, happy to chat with you. And best of luck in your own work. Thanks for coming. It was wonderful to have somebody here. I thought maybe no one would show. So.
Thank you for sharing.
All right.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay, for making it real and to
Yeah.
showing and to give hope. It's
Yeah.
an excellent model for
Thanks.
going through very difficult situations. So thank you for giving me hope.
Good. Yes. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I think it's probably one of the most, like I said, I went, oh, but actually the most interesting and comprehensive models I can use.
Oh, great.
Yeah. As I work at the university I work with has very academic, science-based courses and art-based drama courses, fine art. And I could tailor that in a, I could have some nice fun with that.
Yeah.
So
I would love to hear if you guys use it for something and, you know, what happens. So
I literally just thought to myself then, from now on, new clients that come in, I'm going to use that for the next however long, and I will let you know what happens, because it's not right. And especially the lady that I've just met, who is in chronic pain all the time. That's
and she isn't. If you look, but it takes someone to
And we started
Shift
this.
your gaze. Yeah.
And I could see it last week. But my mind hadn't got a format, and gives actually me as a practitioner a really good format for that. I also work with someone with a chronic health condition with a different, it's not pain, but again, I will try it on that and see. And
and this is also why, even though I know some people let go of the problem and they want to just focus on the future, I still find that people are so identified with the problem if you skip it. So it's often quite a lot easier to find an exception to a problem than a misty, distant thing that isn't happening, or you think it's not happening. And so I always try to put it in the starkest terms. When is this thing not happening at all? And I try to encourage them. As a person who lived with chronic pain for 30 years, I'll guarantee they're happening, but it's very easy to overlook because they're so small, and the rest of the day it's so big, or the night, But it'd be like once you find them, there's this shocking sense of possibility, and then more and more of them, even without changing. So anyway, thanks for joining.
And I will try it as well on my clients in organizations. It's chronic conflict, chronic, it's fill in the blank.
Yes.
But I would really, I am very, again, excited as well to try this out. So thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. Thank you for being so generous, also for sharing. So thank you. And I will find you to share back.
Okay. All right. I'm all over the internet.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So see you guys later.
Bye.